Right, well, welcome everyone to our discovering the opportunities about the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park. I'm delighted to have Marnie Ogg joining us this evening. She's going to be giving you a fabulous presentation, and there'll be opportunities to ask questions as you go. It's being recorded, so we'll do a shout out to everyone who's watching the recording. And over to you, Marnie.
Thanks, Vivian, and thanks for all your organising with this. It's my debut into the world of webinars, so we'll see how it goes. But please, if you do have a question along the way, as Vivian said, it's an informal presentation, and I'd really love your thoughts and feedback as we go through. So, kicking it off, we have this fabulous image of the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park taken at Siding Spring Observatory. Looking at that fantastic sky, the Milky Way there in front of you, thousands of stars, you can see why this sky should be treasured. Looking at that sky, you're actually looking at a sky that's pretty much as pristine as it would have been 40,000 years ago, so before white man came along with their artificial lights. So before we go too far into this talk, I'd just like you to have a quick read of this disclaimer. It's just a quick thing to say, basically, I am not a lighting engineer, an astronomer, an expert, or an evangelist. I'm doing this because I'm a traveller, a proponent for dark skies, and I'm an optimist. And I think there's a message here to share, and I'm particularly fond of the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park. So to give you a bit of background about myself, I have been doing some work with the Department of Planning for about the last 9 months. And the role came about partly because I was actually one of the instigators of getting the Dark Sky Park designated, but also of my role, which I did for 2 years at Sydney Observatory, where I spent a lot of time talking to the City of Sydney about their lighting applications and all sorts of ins and outs of light pollution. So this wonderful picture of Sydney Observatory, which celebrated its 160th anniversary just a week and a half ago, shows light pollution during vivid. But besides that, I've also spent 25 years in travel, doing everything pretty much from waitressing all the way through to flying planes. So during this presentation, what we'll catch up on a little bit is the following. So how does light affect you? What is a dark sky park? We'll touch on the Orana Guidelines and also some of the opportunities and benefits of the dark sky park for Coonabarabran and the surrounding areas. I guess the first thing to mention is that with such a short period of time, within 150 years, we've basically gone from fire being the main source of night light to this. This is a fabulous picture of Hong Kong with all its lights on. And we're moths to a flame. We know that people love this. We love vivid. We love actually having lights on. But there's a question about what it's actually doing for us, and is it actually the best thing? The key thing is this used to be the brightest object in the night sky. And now, and you know how bright a full moon can be, but now we've got lights that are actually 150 times brighter. So these three gents, Robosh, Hall and Young, who I think should have started a rock band in the 70s, did some work about 10, 15 years ago, which was pretty interesting when it came to light. So studying this little guy, which is a fruit fly, they actually came to understand that its movements and its habits throughout the day were completely dictated by the movements of the sun and by light itself. But they also acknowledged that if you were to push these patterns out just a little bit, that the fruit fly couldn't actually do its job or continue properly. And I guess the way we know that best is with things like jet lag, that we get that feeling that it should be nighttime, but we can't quite cope and we're not quite working at our full capacity. Their work was so important that they actually won the 2017 Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physics. Their work actually probably is better known to us now as circadian rhythms. So we know now that the human body operates at certain times of the day doing certain things. Our blood pressure will go up at certain times of the day and come down. That we have melatonin secretion, which starts at about 9 o'clock, and that's actually the hormone that tells us, okay, it's time to start getting sleepy and going to bed now. But we also know that in artificial light is being linked to this hormone being suppressed, and that blue lights are particularly sensitive to this. So I'll talk a little bit more about the blue lights, but this is particularly in the LED lights which are coming through now, which are very sustainable and very efficient lights. But there's a question around how much it's impacting, and they're actually saying up to 5 times greater than the original street lights were. And that these sensitivities are actually being linked with reduction of sleep, dissatisfaction with sleep quality, but even as much as things with obesity, cancer, and degenerative neurological diseases such as Parkinson's. I also read something the other day about antidepressants actually not even being working correctly if you're out of your circadian rhythm. So we really don't know. It's such a formative science at the moment. But there's enough science to support the American Medical Association to adopt guidelines around high intensity street lighting. And in June 2014, they actually presented this. So we know that people are starting to get a little bit worried about this. This is probably not a terribly self-explanatory slide, but on the left-hand side there, you have a picture from my iPhone with the nightshade quality on it. So that's basically reducing that high quality blue light that your phones, televisions, laptops, computers can emit at night, well actually emit all the time. But what we're understanding is that that light probably isn't so good for us at night, and it goes into this nightshade mode if you want to set it. The daytime mode is the right-hand side. So we know Apple probably wouldn't be doing this if they didn't think that there was some sort of impact on people. This is a really interesting slide with 2 images. The top one taken of India in 2012 and the bottom 2016, same place, India. And you can just see how much more light has come to the continent of, or the country of India. It's fabulous that people are having this opportunity to live in well-lit cities, but the information taken from the NASA images by the Swami satellite actually predicted that over this period, or actually collected data to say that each year light was being increased by 2%. That's each year. And I'm, make a little joke there that that's more than we would actually get in our bank account if we had any savings in there. But what is really, really critical with this is, that's a huge amount of increase in lighting. But what is not being picked up in these images, just because of the sensitivity of the cameras, is this very high white light. So this is just that yellow light that you would have had in old-fashioned street lights, etc. So what do I mean by white, blue lights? If we take this picture here, which I think is a fabulous image, it's actually a photo taken during summer nights in far northern Norway. The sun actually hasn't hit, it doesn't actually set below the horizon, so they have 24 hours of sunlight. But you can actually see that starting from the left and all the way through, that the sun goes through certain periods, and that as it rises, the colour intensity of the light gets stronger and stronger. And our body is actually used to and picks up these signals from the sun or from our light through our circadian rhythm cycle. So what we're actually sort of suggesting is that most lights, if we can aim for it, should be around that middle point, around about the 3,500 Kelvin, and rather than pushing everything into the cool white light range, which basically gives us a full sense of day, 24 hours a day, if we want to have lights on in our house. So that cool white light is what we call the white, or the whiter than white to the blue spectrum. And that this is a really good example of a street, the same street that was originally in that warm golden colour, which Coonabarabran has throughout their streets, which has currently been moved into the white light spectrum. And the reason councils are doing this is because the lights on the right-hand side tend to be much more cost effective to run and considered more sustainable. But there are options that we can do on the left-hand side as well. It's just an opportunity that the councils are refitting their lights, and that's why they're going to the blue light. And that's what's happening in places like India as well. So a question is how much is this light actually costing us in our carbon footprint? And I thought this was a particularly interesting statistic that I read a few weeks ago. Vienna recently reduced their street lightings by 50% just for 1 hour each night. Now, astronomers were basically the only people that picked up that there was any significant reduction, and they picked that up in light pollution. There was nothing from the public. Nobody called out saying, oh my goodness, we're unsafe now. Nobody even noticed. But Treasury did, and they saved €200,000 per annum. I've also heard of Sussex in the UK doing the same thing and having the same sorts of results, and Maryborough in New Zealand similarly doing the same thing. They're actually putting their lights on timers, a little bit like this video here. I'm just going to move forward a bit because this is a particularly long video, but this is a prize-winning technological introduction. It was a company in Switzerland that basically took over 5 kilometres of road in a canton in the country. And what you'll see is as this car actually drives down the road, the lights actually turn on. It's sensitive to the movement of the cars. It's also sensitive to pedestrian movement. So if you're walking down the street, you'll actually turn the lights on as well. The key things about safety are taken into mind with the intersection there being lit up permanently and a little bit brighter as you approach it. But basically, this actually reduced that canton's area of their footprint by about 70%, which is enormous. Now, if I had my way, those lights would be that lovely warm golden orange colour as well. But you can see from that footage, as we may have noticed, that there was no upward light spill. There was nothing going up into the sky. All the light was coming down. And this is fabulous lighting qualities, basically. These are the sort of things that we're after. It's just about using light when you need it, how you need it, and the most effective use. So let's talk a little bit about flora and fauna, particularly given the Warrumbungle region is so prolific with both. This was a study done on some sparrows, actually, in the US. And what they did, and I won't go into too much of the detail, but what they actually did was took 400 birds and infected them with the West Nile virus. Now, this is a disease that you can get. It won't make you die. It did make all the sparrows die. There was a huge population depletion with the disease over there. It will make you feel a little bit sick and give you a crick neck. But yes, it is in Australia. So what they did was they infected 400 birds. They put 200 of them in an incredibly artificially lit environment and one with normal lighting conditions, normal daylight conditions. Those that were in an artificial light containment took 4 days to fight the infection. Those that were in normal daylight situations only took 2 days. Now, for every day that that bird's infected, that's a day that you can get sick and become infected as well. But what's also really interesting is that they're actually postulating that this could actually be the same sort of case scenario with malaria. So we're understanding that light is actually affecting these sparrows. Similarly, in Bern, in Switzerland, they did a scenario where they had all these students sitting in a field, and this was over, I think, over 13 years. It was a long period, might have been 10. And they basically sat in the field with their night vision goggles, counting moths and beetles and bats, just to see who was pollinating, where things were landing, how frequently they were making visits, etc. And what they noticed was as soon as you put in a row of street lights, moths didn't go past it. We know moths are attracted to street lights. We know they're attracted to any light for that matter. So they basically got to the light, swam around that and didn't actually move on anywhere else. This actually represented 62% fewer visitations. And over that period, they recognised that this calculated to about 13% less fruit in these fields. So we're just creating this false environment for these pollinators, and we're actually losing out because of it. Actually, today I also read that we've lost something like 75% of our insect population. They've calculated it en masse. How they've done that, I don't know, but it was an interesting statistic. And finally, just an Australian research project that happened in Western Australia. They took a colony of wallabies that were living on Garden Island in Western Australia in a naval base. Now, half of this island is incredibly well lit for a secure naval base, and the other half is basically national park and pristine land. And what they did was observing these wallabies with doing blood tests on their melatonin, using light loggers, and just actually observing them physically. They realised that the wallabies in the well-lit area of the island were actually postponing their the births of their wallabies, of their young, up to a month later. But this was actually not in the peak period when they would have the best food or anything. They were completely thrown out. Their natural cycle was put off. So we're knowing that the survival of species are actually potentially being affected by this as well. And finally, before I give you a second to ask a question if you have one, probably the poster child for night sky preservation has been the turtle for a very long time. We know that turtles are affected by light. And if you aren't aware, the turtles, when it's optimum time, the sand is of a certain heat, warmth, they will come out of the eggs, out of their shells, and look towards the water. Now, what they're actually looking for is the cue of the moon on the water to actually go out and swim around and create their lives. You can see from this image on the bottom left-hand side that they get confused. They don't know which way is up. They don't know which way is down because of the city lights or the town lights that are right next to this. Now, this was an image taken at Bundaberg in Queensland. And a lot of work is being done around this particular region because of the light sensitivity. We've got a big population of people living next to a pristine maritime environment. And Greenfleet have become involved. Now, you might know of them. They're a carbon offset company. If you buy a ticket with Qantas, for example, you can actually carbon offset your flight, and they will plant trees. Now, what they've done is planted 60,000 trees on the beach side in Bundaberg. And what they're trying to do is create a green curtain so that none of the light coming from the town is actually going to hit these turtles and confuse them. So there's a lot of science and research being done on there, and it's a part of the Low Glow project. The Low Glow project is actually supported by Greenfleet, but also Walt Disney Foundation and Prince Charles. So recently in Bundaberg, when Prince Charles was out here, he opened this visitor centre, which has just been built in conjunction with the local community and tourism grants to help support these turtles. Now, I think that the Dark Sky Park in the Warrumbungles has just as much opportunity to actually get Prince Charles or some other bigwig involved, and this could be a fabulous opportunity. So that's sort of the health section of the talk. I don't know, has anyone got any questions or any thoughts so far before I move on? I'm just going to have a glass of water, quick drink.
Yeah, you do that, Marnie. Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions, you're welcome to turn on your microphone if you want to ask via voice, or down on the bottom of your screen, you've got the capacity to type in the chat. It may be different for someone who's on an iPad, and I noticed someone was on one before. So we've got a few people joined in now, which is great. So Bernie's actually said, fascinating information, Marnie. I used to work in the Northwest Australian pearling industry, and I'm used to moon's effect on tides and marine spawning cycles. So I can imagine how light levels are also part of this. Lots of new info for me here. Yeah, it's quite fascinating.
Well, and we know that, so a little bit of anecdotal evidence is that from a marine biologist I was speaking to, is that light sensitivity can actually be detected as far as 150 metres below distance below the sea level. So we know that the moon is even affecting these tiny weeny creatures as far low as that, even in new moon. So we just don't know what our artificial lights are doing yet.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting aspect, isn't it? And as you said, with the iPhones having how we've got that night light sort of view that we can turn on. Obviously, there are studies starting to show about that, the impact on us, and if it's affecting moths and it's affecting all sorts of creatures, yeah, what's it doing to us? It's a big question, isn't it?
And we know that, over the last sort of 10 years, there's more and more cases of ADHD. And actually, I haven't mentioned it in this talk, but we are, and I will mention it later, but we are doing a conference later in the year. One of the speakers that we've got is actually talking about cancer and the correlation with it, particularly in Israel. He actually looked at the population of Israel, the most artificially lit cities, and then the correlation with breast cancer, and bingo, they completely overlapped. So I think we're certainly still in the new days of this, but we know that light is a form of torture. So if you impact people and you don't give them their normal sleeping cycle, you can actually disrupt someone's mental health quite badly in a bad situation. Were there any other questions or thoughts? Or
not seeing any in the chat. And anyone's welcome any time to type in the chat. So down the bottom, you've got a chat button. If you want to type in there, you can ask, and then the next round of questions, you'll be able to. Marnie's going to do it in stages so that we can capture things. So certainly jot them down, and I'm happy to verbalise them if you're not keen to come on. I haven't been using my camera, so yeah. So if you don't want to come on camera, you don't have to. You don't have to have the microphone. All right. Thanks, Marnie. Let's go to the next stage.
Sure. So, there's my question slide. So, what does this mean for Coonabarabran and the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park and other opportunities as well? So, I'm sort of going into the travel stuff now. You might notice in this picture, I should explain what this picture actually is. I sort of taken it for granted, but in the top right-hand corner, we have a picture of total solar eclipse. Now, this is a phenomenon that happens simply because the moon is 400 times closer than the sun, which is 400 times bigger than the moon. And basically what you're seeing there is the moon directly passing in front of the sun and completely covering it over. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that it's quite dark. And that's probably about 5 minutes before the sun's completely been covered by the moon. So it just gets very, very dark. And then on the right-hand side, there's a picture of Fred Watson looking up with some solar filter glasses at the sun being covered over. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this to you is that this was a total solar eclipse that we saw in USA last year. And with a group of about 25 Australians, Fred and I went to Jackson Hole. I booked the accommodation 3 years before, and I was one of the last to get rooms. This is what people will do if they're attracted to something that's an astronomical event. 100,000 tourists went to see this, and I should explain too that this event is only visible within a 50-kilometre radius. So if you're outside that 50-kilometre band, you won't see it. You might notice it gets a bit darker, but it's amazing that you really don't see it. Now, as I said, this is what people will do when they're attracted to something that's astronomical. And it was so great that people were actually renting out their garages and all sorts of things just to get people into this area to see it. One of the reasons I mention it is because it's astronomical, and that's the sort of market that we can actually be attracting with the Dark Sky Park. The other thing is that in July 2028, on the 22nd of July, Coonabarabran, it's not actually the town itself, but the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park will actually be within that band. So this is something that you could probably start preparing for and getting ready for. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, which sounds a bit strange when you're looking at a picture of snow like this, is a town in Sweden called Kiruna. You may have seen it on television. It's a very famous mine. It's iron ore. And it is also the home for the Swedish Space Institute, where Richard Branson hopes to fly some flights with his Virgin Galactic planes. But what makes this town special is the fact that it's absolutely miles from anywhere. If you look at the bottom image, you can see where it is in Stockholm, and it's about a 3.5-hour flight from Stockholm. But besides the mine itself, it's famous for its ice hotel. Well, this was just a little concept that someone put together. He had some people stay one night. He thought he would build them an igloo, and they stayed in the igloo. And now what they do is they create and carve a complete ice hotel every winter that people can stay in. They're getting 300,000 people or more visit this ice hotel every single year. This was just an idea that attracted people to the area, and you can see the beautiful snowy tops of the villa there. It also doesn't hurt, I should say, that it's a fabulous place to see the Aurora Borealis. But the thing is there's a market here for people to travel to see things that they otherwise wouldn't see in their cities. We know that tourism has a benefit around the world, and there's certainly cultures and countries around the world that actually don't have much else than tourism. The benefits are economic, social, cultural, and environmental. So through the aspects of tourism, we can actually talk about the environment. We can increase the economic opportunities for businesses, for towns, but it's also really an opportunity for entrepreneurs to dig in and see how they can make the most of the environment that's around them. Excuse me. I won't dwell on this too much, but it's pretty obvious that Australia is topped up by a lot of tourism, particularly countries like China and New Zealand, $3.7 billion coming from China. And you'll actually notice, and if you don't know already, but the Chinese, Japanese, Koreans are absolutely huge in interest to astronomy. They can't wait to see the southern sky. They are fascinated with the Southern Cross. They want to see the Milky Way. It's something they don't see in their own country, partly because of light pollution, partly because of air pollution, and just simply too because of where they are on the equator. They actually don't see the beautiful things that we get to see in our southern sky. So here's an example of a place that's doing this really well. About 3 years ago, Aoraki in Mackenzie Reserve in New Zealand got their dark sky status. Actually, it might have been 4 years ago now. You can see from this, it's a beautiful dark sky, a bit similar to the one that I showed you before. It's also very similar to Siding Spring in the sense that it has a major scientific institution operated by Canterbury University on Mount John, and they've always had a pull towards astronomy anyway. People have been interested in that. But since they've got their dark sky designation, they are now employing 60 night sky guides. They do night sky tours every single night of the week. And from the profits of that, they've actually just built this beautiful, fabulous cafe, which gives them the opportunity to do things during the day as well. They estimate that they're probably getting, and I have to say I've forgotten the statistic, but I think it was about 400,000 people a year. They charge $60 a ticket. They have a whole enterprise that someone at the bottom of the hill dresses you as before you go up, because it's quite high, it's very cold. You think you're going to be adequately dressed, but they actually rent you socks, they rent you shoes, they rent you hand warmers and beanies and everything, and you do your night sky tour, and then at the end of the night, you come off, you strip down, someone washes it, and then it all happens the next day. So that's just a little tiny side business that's been generated by this fabulous place in New Zealand. So before we go on too far about this, we probably should say, well, what is a dark sky park, or what is a dark sky place? And basically what we're trying to do with the area is just to give people an opportunity to get back to nature, get back and see the starry night sky, to experience a nocturnal environment which has a scientific, educational, cultural heritage and natural enjoyment for people. The designation came through the International Dark Sky Association. So they're an organisation based in Tucson. They just celebrated their 25th anniversary. They also celebrated their 100th dark sky place designation a couple of months ago, and actually since then they've designated 2 more. So this is a movement that is actually really taken off in the Northern Hemisphere. Yeah, this slide shows you there's 68 parks in America. So parks, we have parks, reserves, sanctuaries and places. We also have communities, which I'll touch on a little bit as well. In Europe, you've got 27, and in the Southern Hemisphere, we're just a little bit slow. We've got 2 in New Zealand, 1 in Africa, 1 in Chile, and 1 in Australia. Now, Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park is always going to be the first, but there are others coming. So, yeah, we were designated in July 2016, and just recently we've actually put phase 2 in as well. So the first part of the park being designated was literally just the border of the Warrumbungle National Park. It was an easy boundary. We knew what was in it. There wasn't too many lights within the park we had to change or anything. And what we did was we went through, we literally took hundreds and hundreds of readings with a little laser pointer, and we took readings of how dark the sky was. Now from that we actually know, as I said right at the very beginning, that the sky that we're looking at above the Warrumbungle National Park is as dark as it would have been about 40,000 years ago. It's pristine. Recently we extended that boundary just a little bit, but enough to include Siding Spring Observatory, and it's that we'll actually be celebrating and opening the launch of in September later this year. And finally, it's taken us about 18 months, but I'm very proud to acknowledge that we now have a Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park sign that's just been put up in the Coonabarra Brand High School. So one of our remits was to actually place a sign up, and so we've ticked that box, and we are now an official dark sky place. When we look at the globe, we're not seeing all of it in this picture, you can see just how light polluted some places are. And I said to you earlier that places like Japan, India, you can see there, and Europe are just incredibly lit. I also love the little line there down the Nile in Egypt. But it represents an opportunity for Australia as a dark sky place, which is basically still not light polluted. Except for our major cities, 3 great big dots there, Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. But there's a lot of dark sky places that we could be making the most of and using this and keeping it pristine pretty much. It's also opportunities, as I said, to bring those people in from overseas to travel to Australia to experience something that they wouldn't get in their own places. When people have visited these 100 parks around the world, they've said the things that they want to see are stars, wildlife, flora and fauna. They want to learn about night sky friendly. Now, it's a really critical thing because we're not telling people turn all your lights off, live in the dark, go and live in a cave and, you know, kill your sheep because that's the only way you're going to live. What we're saying is, as that thing right at the very beginning with the street lights, we want the lights to come down. We want to be mindful that when we're using light, we're using it correctly, that we're using it when we only really need it. And that's what's a fabulous opportunity with the Dark Sky Park. It's also really great just to get comfortable with the dark. We hardly walk, actually, when I say we, I realise that it's probably more often than not Sydney or city folk that aren't getting around in the dark. We don't walk down dark streets. We don't ever, even my house, which is, you know, fairly rural situation, I've got street lights everywhere. So my house, even at night, has some sort of light penetrating it. So we've forgotten how to be comfortable in the dark. But the 2 bottom points there are the things that I think are key to this, is that, and key to the opportunity that the Warrumbungles represent, is there's an opportunity for people to leave the city and get grounded and to reset their body clocks back to. We know that feeling that when you go camping, you're so much more rested than when you go to a city and you might go to the zoo and do all those things. What we can do is give people both of those opportunities in different places. So the Warrumbungle National Park, when we submitted it, these were the reasons that we gave. That it was already the home to astronomical observatories. It's nationally heritage listed, its plants, its animals, its beautiful volcanic landscapes, the Indigenous communities which prize this land, and the opportunity for tourism, which I think is still yet to really truly be tapped into. But the key thing was that there was already existing legislation that makes the skies over the Warrumbungle National Park and the Orana area dark. So I think that's the end of our second session. Does anyone have any questions from that?
Yes, so anyone's welcome to. I have muted microphones as people have come in, and it's great. We've got Joel Amiot, and we've also got a team from the Acacia Motel, which is great. So we've got quite a few people from different areas.
Great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, looks like maybe Julie's dropped off. Could be their connection. So has anyone got any questions for Marnie in relation to the Dark Sky Park or tourism and anything like that? You're welcome to take the microphone. If you prefer to type your question, you can, there's a little chat button down the bottom of your screen. You can type in the chat, or you're welcome to turn on your microphone and ask a question. And it gives Marnie a chance to have a bit of a breather. Need to drink water.
I hope I'm not baffling you or bombarding you with too much information. But,
there's lots there.
yeah.
Okay. Well, feel free as you're going along. There's the chat button. You can type in and ask questions as you go. When we have our next break, you're more than welcome to ask any questions.
I guess the other thing too is if before we go on with the next bit, if you do wake up in the middle of the night or have questions tomorrow or whatever, I'm always welcome. You're always welcome to contact me. I'm always open for questions. So just drop me an email or contact Vivian and we can go from there.
Fabulous. And we can follow up. People have been hooked in and registered. Maybe not everyone has, so I might share that at the end so that there's a possibility that you can get some follow-up information, and we'll share the recording of this as well.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we were talking about the legislation, and I also mentioned at the beginning of the talk that the work I've been doing recently, since about October, has been with the Department of Planning in New South Wales. And the Dark Sky Guidelines that you see on the right-hand side there have actually recently been updated in 2016, but they're actually been in place since about 1987. So this is something that's not new to the area, and this is why, again, we were able to get the designation through for the Dark Sky Park, because for such a long time, people have been keeping their lights low. They have been very mindful of their lighting outdoors, and this has kept the lights nice and low. The designation is basically a 200-kilometre radius around Siding Spring Observatory, and it's all been put into place because of the observatory. Basically, everything that the observatory is doing is based on the light coming from the stars. So if your lights are spreading upwards and spraying all over the night sky, the light information that they're trying to gather from stars and galaxies 13.8 billion light years away are not going to reach them. So the legislation was put in place to basically keep everything within a 200-kilometre radius nice and dark, being the national facility for optical astronomy. So within that, you've got 3 designations as well. Anything and anyone that lives within 0 to 12 kilometres outside of the observatory, you've got basically a maximum of 4 outdoor lights, and you're only allowed to have that to the maximum light intensity of 900 lumens. Between 12 and 18 kilometres, you're still only allowed 4 lights, but this can go up to double that, so 1800 lumens. And then anything basically from Coonabarabra and outside of that, if it's a major impact or it's a big facility, it actually goes to Siding Spring Director to actually be acknowledged and ensure that good lighting policies are actually put into place before the building is put with all of its lights alight. The principles that we're actually trying to abide by now, as I said, this is some work that we're doing with the department, so this is why it's important for you to hear this, being residents of the area. If you notice there's that horizontal plane line there and everything above that is in grey, but that would actually be wasted light. So anything that you've got spraying upwards is basically going to create light pollution. It's wasted light. It's not required there at all. And you'll be surprised how many trees are lit up in Sydney particularly. The other couple of things from that image to look at is the useful light. So you can see from that dark yellow band, that's where we want the light to go. If Vivian is sitting in that spot, that's where we want the light to go. And we really don't, we want to try and avoid that light spill that's spreading out further to the sides. The other thing there is light trespass, which you can see, which is on the house. Now, basically, that's what I was talking about with light torture. It's light that is being inflicted on someone who doesn't actually want it. So they probably had to put blockout curtains or blinds or whatever else. And it's actually covered by an Australian standard called AS 4282 and is actually legislated. So if you have a problem with it, you can actually report it to your councils and ask them for support to actually have the lights reduced in that area. And that just sort of explains it a little bit further. The other key thing is that we want lights to be shielded. So by shielded, you can see in the first image there, number A, that there's glass panels there that would actually allow light to escape. And the second one is not bad, you've got it covered, but you can also see the globe of the light underneath. So that would be light that would be spilling out and not directed to exactly where you want it to be. Whereas C is perfect, it's completely covered over. So there's no upward light spill, there's nothing penetrating the night sky. The key principles are outlined here. So we want to eliminate upward light spill. We don't want anything above that light, that horizontal light plane. We want to direct lights downwards, not upwards. We use the shielded fittings, which is those globes that I was showing you there. We avoid overlighting. So if you can see and you can get around and you're safe, you don't need 400 lights. If you're playing tennis, you don't need to have Olympic standard lighting. And when you're not using them, turn them off. Put them on a sensor, make them time sensitive or make them motion sensitive. Use energy efficient bulbs and use the asymmetric beams. That's the one where we want to actually make sure that the person or the place that we're using is actually lit up, not everything else. We want to ensure too, now this is something I've touched a little bit on, but the surface below is also really important to what we're doing. So if we've got a light that's bouncing off a hard white concrete ground or even more reflective surfaces like tennis courts, etc., we want to try and avoid that basically. So we might push the light around a little bit so that it doesn't impact directly straight up and downwards. And the other thing right from the beginning of the conversation is the warm white lights. So we don't want that blue, whiter than white light. We don't want the cool white light when you go to the hardware store. We want the warm lights. Excuse me. So this is interesting. This might not work on a webinar, but we'll see how it goes. Here's a few examples of some lighting. Now, I'm asking you which ones you think might be good and which ones might not be so good. Anyone like to hazard a guess? Or will I just talk?
We'll just see. We'll give them a moment. So does anyone want to type in the chat or turn on the microphone and see which ones they think would be good lighting?
Yes, good lighting.
Top right, good. Oh, we've got a few answers. Bernie said top right, good. Joel said top right. Yeah. Yep,
perfect. So it's great. It's under an awning, the light's coming down, it's a nice warm light. It's nice. The bottom one is not so great because we've got a street sign there, which thankfully doesn't exist like this in Coonabarabran or the local Orana region, but it's all light penetrating upwards. Now, I will actually draw your attention to the left-hand image because it's one that you can go and check out for yourself. This is the Coonabarabran TAFE, and you'll actually see that every single pylon of the TAFE is lit, and it's reflecting on that hard white concrete surface, and you've got this very, very bright white welcome light. all these lights are on all night. So we're breaking the reflective surface, the overlit, and unnecessary lighting, basically. And I can understand how it's happened. Basically, TAFE builds to a standard that is required in towns and cities, and it's basically been implemented in Coonabarabran. It's nobody's fault, but it's something that we need to try and work with the TAFE to try and help resolve. So yes, they're the two bad and one good. And again, this is an example. You can see from this, we were talking about the trees being lit up. There's no reason for the light to be spilling up that way. So that orange floodlight, yep, great colour, but we just need to tilt it downwards a little bit onto the surface that we're actually needing. This is at 11:30 at night. There's nobody on the site, so is it necessary to have it on? And the hard white reflective surfaces again. Oh, that's a bad one. Was someone going to guess that one? And I'll let you guess this one. So you might want to tell me which is good light here.
Okay. Oh, and so there's been a comment here. I've heard about this, but I've only been there in daytime. But if some of this recording is available, I'm happy to advocate for the more appropriate lighting at TAFE.
Okay.
That's from Bernie. Yep. So we're asking for which is the good light, Marnie, in this question? In this screen? Left-hand side is a question mark?
Yes. Yep. And do we know why it would be a good light? If not, I'll just answer.
Oh, I'm thinking it'd be because it's got the cover over the top. It's very directed. So it's an orange, and as Bernie said, it looks warm and shielded.
Yeah, exactly. So it's lighting up the surface or the area that we want to use. The other light, the right-hand light, is quite nice. It's a nice warm colour. It's not a high penetrating, glary, bombarding light. But ideally, we would have a cover over the top of that to keep it, keep the light penetrating down, not going upwards. And the bottom one is just a bit of a reminder of the blue screen. We often don't realise how much blue light is being emitted at night. We're looking at a white light, but it's actually coming out to us as a blue light. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on that before I move on? I don't think there's another one. Oh, there we go.
Not seeing any.
Okay. So that's sort of the lighting part of the question, the talk. But there are so many opportunities for the area to embrace the Dark Sky Park. As I said, we've had 100 parks designated around the world. And in September last year, I was lucky enough to go to the European Dark Sky Places conference in Scotland. Now, their Dark Sky Park is actually at a fairly similar location. The closest nearest big town is a 3-hour drive, which would be Edinburgh. It's in a very difficult place, I guess, to say in this particular spot. But the conference just branched on so many fantastic things that people are doing overseas. So remembering too that you might get 10, 20, 30 really good clear nights within a European dark sky place. We have a sky that is pretty much clear 300 nights of the year. It's not cold, it's not wet. But the places that are appealing to people who are driving 3.5 hours to get to these dark sky places, to leave their polluted cities, light polluted cities, are doing things like art in the dark. There are kids doing glow in the dark paintings. There's sculptures that you can touch. There's sensory perception tours where you actually walk and you can see an image there with night goggles on, so that people can actually go into the park and see animals looking back at them, and remembering too that we've got a nocturnal species greater than anywhere else in the world. 30% of our animals are nocturnal. That's more than anywhere else. They're seeing bats, they're seeing moths, they're doing theatre, they're doing poetry. And actually, I haven't told my guests this. I'm just about to go off to Ireland in a few weeks' time, and I've booked a tour of the Dark Sky Park in County Mayo, which is on the wild Atlantic coast in Ireland. Wet and dark, and probably fairly unlikely that we'll see a nice, beautiful sky. Certainly not like anything in the Warrumbungles. But the girl that is running those tours is a magician, and she's doing leprechaun tours. So she's not telling us this. I just happen to know that this is what's going to happen. But the thing is that people want an experience that they don't get anywhere else. They want to get away from the big city. They want to have an opportunity to perhaps have an experience that they had when they were kids, that they could be free, that they could walk through safe places. And this seems to be the biggest attraction to dark sky places. There are benefits other than tourism. So we know too that, as I said in the beginning, the council rates in Vienna were reduced by 200,000 per annum, 200,000 euro, just by reducing their hours by 1 hour, their lights by 1 hour. So I've never been able to get the statistics on this. I've asked various departments, but I believe that Coonabarabran rates are about $15 to $20 per person cheaper per annum, just simply because there's not a huge amount of excess light being used in the town. There's a whole lot of smart city technologies, such as those street lights that are being implemented around the world. In reports that I've read in Australia around smart cities, 12 of the last 15 projects that have been implemented have all been in regional communities. It's much easier to put something in a small community and trial it, see what feedback you get, see what works and what doesn't work. So again, there's an opportunity there for council or communities to actually get together and say, look, let's put our hand up and test some new street lights or some new capacities. I see a question coming in. And it's an opportunity for Coonabarabran to benchmark good lighting practices and actually get people to come up to the city or up to the town to see what impacts might be there might be on health and well-being, about research and development for the national parks, etc. I would love it. I'm often told, oh, well, you know, maybe you should be fighting more of the big cities and talk to them about how they should be keeping their lights low and you should be doing this and blah, blah. But what I would actually like to do is say, well, actually, there's a town up in the Warrumbungles that has 3,500 people. They're all living in this community that's pristine. There's no upward light bill. Their energy rate is much lower. Let's take you up there and do a famille and actually show you what good lighting actually means and that people can live within this. There's also opportunities to bridge alliances between art, science and community. So there's all sorts of different grants, particularly around art and science, about merging the two, and opportunities for festivals, art prizes, astrophotography competitions, etc. And I'd like to end actually on a very inspiring image. And I'm not going to end quite yet, but when I do. But I think too, the thing is that it's an opportunity for small businesses. This is an entrepreneur's delight. If you've got a passion in something, if you've got an idea that you've always loved, if you're good with kids, then get kids into the national park. If you're good with art, then start thinking about what art and art projects could be aligned with it. If you're into management, you know, there's all sorts of areas. And I think the thing with entrepreneurism is that it's very much about taking your passion and making what you're good at benefit the local community. And then you've got a synergy between the two. And finally, the inviting new audiences. I know just from the work that I've been doing, I've been speaking to the Bowling Club Association of New South Wales and saying, do you know that actually you're losing a lot of energy with your lights going up into the air? Let me bring you to Coonabarabran and let's do a conference on fantastic outdoor bowling lights. I've talked to the hotel associations to actually talk about, well, what are the principles involved with lighting hotels and what are the requirements? And they've got a fabulous lighting policy. They've actually spent a long time putting together, and it's actually very good. It aligns very much with these principles. But I'm not sure how many hotels actually know about it, or And again, do we have an opportunity to bring the hotel association, committee, board, chiefs, conference, whatever, to town to actually say, well, here's a whole range of hotels that have guests that come and stay, and we've got all these lovely warm lights, not overlit outdoors, etc., etc. They're just some quick ideas. Actually, Bernie, I know that you're at the TAFE, so are there courses that we can do around tourism? Are there courses that we can do around good lighting practices? Is there an opportunity to talk about, we haven't talked about it so much from a medical perspective, but could we get groups up to do research on hotel lighting, or actually do blood tests and do blood pressure tests when you take people into the park? I know from the conference that I was at in Scotland that there are rehab groups, that's probably not the right word, but they're taking people from nursing homes and schools for children that have learning disabilities, and taking them into the Dark Sky Park and seeing how they react, and seeing how their learning is enhanced, giving them opportunities to learn in a different environment. Is it that white blinding light in the schoolrooms that is actually turning some kids off? I mean, I know I struggle having very bright lights in offices. So there's all sorts of things. It's just a matter of taking what your interest is and overlaying it with the Dark Sky Park. Did someone have a question there, or do you want me to keep going?
There's just a few comments, Marnie. So Joel mentioned that the last rates bill for him was just under 2,000 in town. So, I mean, I suppose there's a lot of factors when it comes to rates, in terms of rubbish collection and a whole host of things. And then Bernie said, I'm writing reminder notes now so I can talk with other staff later. The possibilities are huge. And in fact, I myself will be talking with some of the team through I'm just trying to think, what's the name of it, Bernie? The new centre. So where the lights are. I'm going to be connecting there and talking with some of the team that are right across. So we'll be looking at art and technology. We're going to have some discussions coming up next week. Mm-hmm. So that'll be interesting. And in fact, there's a CETA project at the moment that's on display out at the Barradine Discovery Centre, and that's using technology and weaving. So there's traditional, it's actually about Indigenous art, but it had community collaboration with weaving. And then there's technologies that you've got paint that you can touch. So it's a different angle in terms of light, but if you touch the paint, that goes around the weaving, you have an audio file play. So there's a lot of potential for, and we've mentioned about QR codes, and so there's potential for astronomy images with a QR code that could be down in the street anywhere that could tell you more about that particular image and that part of the sky or something fascinating. So there's a lot of opportunity for art and technology.
That have been associated with the science and technology in the area. I mean, Coonabarabran has a huge background of science and engineers, and so yeah, there's a whole bunch of really talented, the robotics team at the school as well.
Yes, and it was the Connected Learning Centre. Thanks, Bernie. My mind went blank on the acronym. Great, the CLC.
Yeah, and I haven't touched on the technology, but I'd love to do something like create you've got your Fitbit that tells you how many kilometres you've walked and if you've got high blood pressure and how many hours you slept. But why would there be an opportunity to actually have how much artificial light you've been in contact with? That actually pushing your circadian rhythm? I don't know. I'm not technologically minded, but that could actually be something that could come from courses and discussions and network people together.
Fantastic. It's exciting.
Okay. I saw a few more comments there, but otherwise I'll keep going. So when I talk to people about all of this, more often than not, I get fairly good feedback. But sometimes I get things like, well, why should I? You know, why should I keep my lights low? Why should I be involved with this? It's not my problem. I'll do it when they do it. And that it's someone else that should be taking the lead. How much is it going to cost? Now, half the time it's actually going to cost you less because you're not wasting light. So that's a win-win if you do actually move over. There's no need. It's green, sustainable and cost effective. Now, in that first image I showed you of Sydney Observatory, there was light spraying up behind it. What we have now behind Sydney Observatory is 3 65-storey towers built by the Green Building Association. Now they're fabulous. All their energy is recycled. It's all about sewage and plumbing and all this fancy high-tech stuff. But every single floor of those 65 levels is lit up all night long. And so when I said to them, you know, if you could actually keep, even if you turn off every second story for us so that we could actually see the night sky and show people Sydney's night sky from Sydney Observatory, you would help us reduce that light. And they said, oh, but why would we do that? It's green energy. Now, and my argument to that is, well, if you caught rain in a bucket, you wouldn't toss it out just because you caught it straight from the sky. And that's, you know, just because it's green doesn't mean we can waste it. The other thing that I struggle and I haven't really been able to come over is it's a head office policy. Now, it's true that there are certain things like Bunnings and hardware stores which basically have a purchasing department which buy all the lights for all of New South Wales, and they ship it all out to outback New South Wales, and they've been told that to use efficient lighting and that these are what globes they are. And when I walk through the hardware stores in the Orana region, 75% of the lights that are actually in the hardware store are not night sky friendly. They are the cool white lights. They've got the unshielded light fittings. And despite my best attempts to go to Bunnings head office and speak to every single person, I've LinkedIn, I've Facebooked, I've done everything, I just get blocked. So I'm not sure how we solve that problem. But my feeling is that if this is something that you want, if you go into the hardware store and you say, I don't want those cold white lights because I've been told that they're not lights that I should be using in a legislated area, then it's supply and demand. They actually have to start buying warm globes. But fabulously, more often than not, people just say, wow, this is amazing. How do I get involved? And this is people, I've talked to people in Oman, in Egypt, in England, and I think people are just looking for something that, it's a win-win. It's such a simple solution to give us a clear and pristine environment in a night sky friendly way. But above else, particularly in the Orana region, this is legislated, so this is why you should be doing it. Okay, finally, I'll just touch on a little bit of another idea that I have been talking to with Coonabarabran and Warrumbungle Council. Is, as you know, we extended the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park boundary from just having the National Park to now including Siding Spring Observatory. But there's an opportunity, given the fact that Coonabarabran, particularly Gilgandra too, are doing exceptionally good things with their lights. You're keeping them low, you're being very mindful. There's a few exceptions and there's a few people that probably don't know that they're doing it wrong, but with a little bit of education, we could actually extend that boundary to have a huge dark sky community. Now, this is an area which is basically a town that has committed to good lighting, and as I said, you're so close to it. So then you could be not only the first dark sky park, but you could actually be the first dark sky community as well. And then you really are that benchmark that I can bring people up from Sydney and say, well, look, this is how a whole community of people are living, and in fact a whole area of people if we extend it to Gilgandra and Coonamble and goodness knows where else. Let's get Dubbo into it too. The picture on the left-hand side is of a town that has just done that in Maryborough in New Zealand. They have a tourism benefit that they are on the wine route in New Zealand, but all of their streetlights, they've just committed to reducing down to that 3,500 Kelvin. And every single person in that town has signed up to this. They are committed to being a dark sky community that people can come and see and say, wow, this is a point of difference. This is the tidy town of the 1950s. This is what people are now looking to and saying, well, how do they live and how do they do this? So if anyone's interested in that, again, you're welcome to contact me. This is a little place that I think could be a really good role model in a way for Coonabarabran. And I've seen another one since too, but this is an island in the Channel Islands called Sark. It was the first place in the world to be designated as a dark sky community. It's also the first dark sky island. It has a tiny population. I think it's only a couple of hundred. But there are no street lights on there. There's no cars, and basically everyone has to walk around at night. They are absolutely overwhelmed with tourists who want to go there during summer. It is absolutely bombarded. And the person that I was speaking to about this was saying they believe it's because of the noddy, what she liked to call the noddy tourism adventure, that the guests that go there can have this experience that they had when they were kids. They can ride their bikes, they can walk around at night, they can meet the locals, they can talk, and there's no threat of being harassed. There's no crime. There's one policeman that comes in for that period just in case there's a few people that get a little bit drunk. But there is, and I'm not suggesting that Coonabarabran should be antiquated or is antiquated. I'm just suggesting that rather than trying to compete with the cities and doing what the cities do, embrace what you have in Coonabarabran and really make it that point of difference, that people feel welcome, that people can talk, that they can walk around safely, that there's an atmosphere of feeling comfortable, I guess, in the dark. And so just before we sort of finish up, I realised that there's a three-pronged approach to this. We can talk to councils, we can talk to local governments and even big governments, federal governments. But I think that the biggest thing that will change the way we operate our light at night is people. That it's about changing behaviours and becoming aware of what we do. And today, the 20th of June, Woolworths stops using their plastic bags. So we know that if there's a movement behind it, people actually get involved. If they can see the benefits, if they can see why you would do it, people do it. The local radio station this morning was saying that they were expecting people to ring in and say, well, this is a waste of time, and why would we do it? But everybody was actually ringing in and saying it should have happened a long time ago. So maybe that's the same way that we get with lights. And it's not a quick thing, it's not like getting women for votes overnight. It took a long time. It took people to raise their voices and took a few examples. And again, I think that Coonabarabran has that, there's so many press opportunities to talk about how you're the first, how you can do this, what you're doing, what technologies, what people are coming up to do conferences, who's staying, what research is being done. And on that point, I'm organising a conference, bringing a whole lot of people together. So we've got environmentalists, we've got ecologists, we've got lighting technicians, we've got policymakers, we've got the Environmental Protection Association, we've got the Department of Planning, we've got astronomers. I'm sure there's there's doctors and researchers in the medical field as well coming. And so in September, we will be inviting all these people to come together and talk about the research that they're doing, the way that they're working, and opportunities to create a collaboration, basically. Because we know that the Roads and Maritime Services install lights but don't understand that they're right next to the turtle sanctuary. And we know that satellite images of the Earth are being taken for astronomers, but could they be actually feeding information back to home builders, etc.? So what we're trying to do is bring everyone together, and I'm opening this up to the local community as well, because I think there's a big opportunity there. for you to hear what's happening and maybe get involved with your own businesses. So we'll send more information out about that. This is an image, I'll finish up shortly, but it's an image from the Blade Runner movie 2049. And if you ever look to the future in futuristic movies, this is always this image of light being bombarded everywhere. And I quite liked the George Orwell quote, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." And I think that preserving that darkness is actually quite important. So I think that's pretty much it from me. But before I show you this fabulous movie, I'll ask again, is there any questions or anything I can do to support you, or any ideas that you may have that you might like to fling my way?
So, Marnie, do you want to, should we share the web address or a contact? What would you?
Sure.
Yeah.
The website address is the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park.org. If you have any questions, emails will go through that. Or if you want to email me directly, it's Marnie, MARNIE, at travelog, travelog.com.au. And you're welcome to ask any questions or ask for some help, or if you need some information to help you get a project off the ground. I've been sort of widely spread over a lot of different people, so I can probably put you in touch with someone.
Fantastic. Not seeing any questions in the chat popping up, so we might finish with this beautiful thing.
So I'll explain what's happening, because I know that if I try and talk over it, it will distort. The image that you see there is San Francisco. And what will happen is that it's a series of about 10 short little clips. Progressively, you'll see that we're getting further and further away from the city. And as we're getting further and further away from the city, we're seeing more and more in the night sky. And this is what is the experience for travellers travelling from Sydney out to Coonabarabran, Warrumbungle area, seeing more and more night stars. It's fabulously done. It's been put together by an artist in San Francisco. My aim, somehow, I'll fund the funds to do this, but I would love to do it, an Australian version. We start off in Sydney or Melbourne and travel further and further out from the city, Melbourne, Manly, Bondi, Blue Mountains, and get out there. Anyway, please enjoy this video. I will leave you afterwards. But thank you very much for your time. I very much appreciate you listening. It's probably something new and different for you to get your head around, but please contact me anytime. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marnie. That was fabulous and a lovely, amazing images to finish on.
Yeah.
Fabulous. And I did share the links and the email in the chat. We will do the recording. We'll put it up certainly in a few places so that they can be shared, and we'll email it out to everyone who registered online for the updates. So thank you, Marnie. So informative, and look, this is my third one and I'm always finding new information and you make it a little bit different each time, and it's such a fascinating area to understand our night sky, lighting and all the impacts that it has on many aspects of our life and our environment. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all your effort in organising it too, Vivian.
My pleasure.
It wouldn't happen without you, that's for sure.
Terrific. Thank you. Good night, everyone, and thank you so much, everyone, participating, answering questions.